What's up guys? Today I am checking out the DM002 DIY drone, and this is about as much fun as you can have for 40 bucks in the FPV hobby. Big fan of this one. Let's get it in the air and check it out. Let's take a look at our $40 DIY drone, the DM002, and I am just a huge fan of this quadcopter. It is a very inexpensive quad, but I feel like you get really high quality components, namely the FPV camera. I think the FPV camera itself is probably worth the price of this quad because you get a really nice signal, really clear, really crisp images, and it hardly ever cuts out. I've flown it mostly outside. Not a huge fan of flying this one indoors because it's a little bit difficult to navigate through tight spaces like hallways or your basement or wherever you might be flying this indoors. Feel like this one really shines outside in an open field, and you got some obstacles here and there where you can maneuver around, because you get a little bit of deadband on the transmitter, especially when you're yawing. You know, you can't be super precise on your turns with this quad. Probably with a little bit of practice, you could get pretty good at turning this and flying it into some really confined spaces, and then getting good enough to fly it indoors. But right out of the box, it's difficult to fly it around inside. So I definitely like this one more outside. And being outside, you're able to fly this one around a large area, a large landmass with this nice FPV camera. Getting back to the FPV camera. So really impressed with that camera. I flew this at a football field and it was very wet out that day. And so I kind of flew it down very conservatively down the football field. And I would say I got about 75 yards away from myself, about 3/4 the length of a football field, American football for those of you that are outside the States. And I didn't have any problems. And I started to see some giant puddles, and I was a little bit afraid of losing signal to the quad and having it go crashing right into one of those puddles. So I decided to turn it around and flew it back to myself, no problem. Didn't have any problems with the FPV, didn't have any problems with the signal from the transmitter. So you have great control from the transmitter and a great signal coming from the camera. So that gives you a lot of different options with this quad where you can fly it. And you can kind of take this thing out and explore your environment. You know, if you're out in a park, fly it around, and you can fly this thing pretty far away from yourself and not really worry. Obviously, you gotta be a little bit concerned about crashing and then knowing where you are and then going and finding your quad. And I do have the white version, and in some of the cases where I crashed, there's quite a bit of snow on the ground and a little bit difficult to find the white one in the snow, but not too bad. I always found it, always made its way back to me. There's also a black version, and that one would probably be easier to find in the snow, but then outside of the snow, that one would have its own difficulties in finding it depending on what kind of environment you're in. So I kind of like the white version myself, but it does come in white and black. Another impressive thing about this $40 quad is its speed and power. I mean, I have been able to just rip this thing low and fast through fields and in windy conditions. I've flown this in parks, and one particular day here, I'll show you some footage where I was flying it by the flagpole, and you can see the flags flowing in the wind. It was fairly windy out that day, and this thing was not having any problems flying around. Obviously, it is a small quad, so it does have the potential of getting blown away, but as long as you fly this thing smart and into the wind and just be aware of when you're flying with the wind at your back. You're gonna get really moving when you're flying with the wind at your back. So as long as you're careful with this one, you can fly it on some pretty windy days. And the speed of this is really impressive. I mean, I don't have any way of clocking how fast this goes, but I've been just kind of zipping by objects and really letting it rip in the field. I guess we can call this one the $40 field ripper, man, because this thing just gets going and it's fast. It's real fast, and that makes it lots of fun to fly. Another plus of this one is it is the DIY drone, so you have to put it together yourself, but it's so simple to put together. It's not even worth a build video. Everything is plug and play. There's no soldering, there's no screws. Everything just snaps into place, and really could not be easier. The only problem I had when I initially set it up was the FPV camera does not, by default, transmit any signal. So it's basically off when you get it, or at least mine was. So there's a couple different settings. There's off, there's 25 milliwatts, there's 50 milliwatts and 200 milliwatts, I believe, on this FPV camera. And I just used the 25 milliwatts and didn't have any issues with it whatsoever. To turn it on, there is a little button on top of the camera here underneath the little cloverleaf antenna. So if you just push the button down once, and you're gonna need like a little screwdriver or something like that to get to it, unless you have some really long fingernails or better dexterity than I have here. A short press is gonna change the channel that you're on, and then a long press is going to change the band, and then a super long press is gonna change your power output between the off 25, 50, or 200 milliwatts. So pretty simple setup, but it might hang a few of you up out there right out of the box, because there's no directions with the FPV camera itself, or at least mine didn't come with any. So just be aware of that. You're gonna probably have to change the power output of the camera when you first set this up. Other than that, the motors are color-coded with red and white connectors, and they just connect in, no soldering involved. And the canopy and the FPV camera holder and the motors and everything just plugs in. Nothing, there's no screws, nothing like that. Super easy setup, super easy build. I've counted 43 major crashes with this quad, and I have one little break in the plastic that snaps into place the canopy with the frame. So now I have placed the zip tie around the quad, so it's a little bit pulling it out of shape, but it still flies pretty decent. And quite honestly, I've had so much fun with this quad that I'm toying with the idea of actually buying another one. This one is so much fun that I would definitely buy this one again, and I'm definitely pleased with the amount of flight time that I got out of it before I had that piece break off. But it still does fly in the condition it's in. Probably not quite as good, but still fun to just let it rip through the field. It's kind of like a beater quad now. If I want to get a quick FPV fix in, just fire this thing up and let it rip, and you know, if it breaks, then I'm not really too concerned about it. Along with the durability, the props are very durable themselves. I have broken a few, but they do hold up to crashes very nicely. Might not be a bad idea to try and pick up some extra ones, especially if you're just starting out. Flight times with the stock battery are pretty consistently right around 2 minutes. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, depending on how aggressive you're flying and what conditions you're flying in. But this does come with a fairly common battery. It is a little bit thin, not sure of the actual dimensions of it, but I have 5 batteries just laying around that will work with this quad. And my favorite battery is actually this 450 milliamp hour battery from JJRC. I believe it was the H31 that this battery came from. And this battery I'm getting about 4.5 minute flights out of, and so that's a pretty decent flight time. And so if you have the means, I highly recommend picking up these H31 batteries. They are a perfect size to slide into the quad. Highly recommend these 450 milliamp hour batteries. I'll link them in the description if I can find them on Amazon or somewhere. Overall, I think you're going to be impressed with this $40 quad, especially if you're curious about getting into FPV. this is definitely the way to go, but I would definitely fly it outside. I wouldn't recommend it as a great indoor flyer. You can certainly fly this one indoors, but I think you're gonna have more fun, especially if you're a beginner, flying this outside in a more open area. So for 40 bucks, you get the quad and a transmitter. You're just gonna have to pick yourself up a pair of FPV goggles. I'd recommend the Eachine VR007s if you're just getting into the hobby and you're not 100% certain you're gonna wanna stay in it. You don't wanna drop 400 bucks on a pair of Fat Sharks or something like that. Pick up the Eachine VR007s with this one, and for under $100, you're flying FPV. So you really can't go wrong there. Only real con I have with this guy is the transmitter is not super precise. It has a little bit of deadband in the yaw, so not 100% accurate on all your movements, and it doesn't turn all that great. But for 40 bucks, you can't really complain, and sooner or later, probably someone has already come out with some sort of deviation where you can fly this with like a Devo 7E or something like that. I would imagine that's coming if it hasn't already. That would definitely make this one a much better flyer, a much more precise flyer. Other con on this one is there's no sort of USB plug to plug it into beta flight or clean flight or something like that, so you're not going to be able to mess with the PIDs, and there is no acro or rate mode on this one, so you're just going to fly it around in stability mode. For some of you out there, that's going to be a con, but for me, I think it's still a lot of fun to fly it around even in stability mode, because you can kind of bash it around and really have a good time with this one. Overall, I had so much fun flying the DM002 around. I highly recommend it. I think you really can't go wrong for the price, especially if you've already got a pair of FPV goggles. You're gonna spend 40 bucks on this guy, and you're gonna have just hours of fun with it. It's durable, it's fast, it has a nice FPV camera, really a nice package here. So if you're interested in this one, I definitely check it out. You really can't go wrong. Hope you guys enjoyed the video with the DM002 DIY drone here. I am just a really big fan of this one. It probably is not going to appeal to everybody, but I had a boatload of fun with this one, and I'm going to continue to fly it. Check the link in the description if you're interested. And if I missed anything with the DIY drone, hit me up in the comments below. Give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Going to be having more reviews and more videos in the future. So until the next one, happy flying and try not to crash and burn.